good Matthew McConaughey. Less good looking. That's all right. Okay, folks. Seats, more seats. Carl, get out of here. You're distracting people. And the topic at hand is the effects of political violence. And although I just made him leave the room, I'll make him come back into the room. Let's first welcome back to the stage the man-shaped machine that pumps out 6 videos a day, no exaggeration, Mr. Tim Pool. He did not change his beanie. Good guess. Our next panelist is none other than the Minds mastermind himself, American entrepreneur, freedom of information activist, CEO, and co-founder of Minds.com, which everyone should be using here. Let's give it up for Bill Ottman. Doesn't he look like a tech CEO? Very unassuming.
Bill.
It's a very fancy shirt, I promise you. Finally, joining us, we have an independent journalist and photographer dedicated to covering topics primarily focused on free expression, protests, and Islam. He's been published in the Wall Street Journal, Quillette Magazine, National Review, and American Spectator, to name a few. This man is no stranger to political violence, having recently been the victim of an Antifa beating while doing field reporting. Please welcome to the stage one of the nicest people you will ever meet, I promise you, Mr. Andy Ngo.
Let's do it.
It's the effect of political violence, right? I can tell you one of the biggest effects of political violence there's 2 parts. The first was that everybody was shocked at what happened to Andy in that video, and it resulted in a lot of people asking a lot of questions and Andy telling his story. The second thing that happened was many of these extremists were angered that they looked really bad because they beat somebody who did nothing. And so the second thing that happened was the smear campaign.
Andy, you next.
This is my first time. Sorry, it's my first time doing public speaking since everything happened on 29th of June. We're over 2 months now. There hasn't been an arrest yet, unfortunately. But I do want to thank the organizers first for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to speak to you all.
Why do you think there haven't been arrests yet?
I can only speculate at this point. I think Portland has a number of issues. In addition to the street violence that has pretty much become a banality now, our governance is odd in that our mayor, who's up for re-election in a very progressive anti-police city, is also the police commissioner. So, I don't know.
Is it because there's a secret cabal of Antifa orchestrating everything behind the scenes, and that it's a deep conspiracy against you? I'm kidding, by the way.
No, nothing like that. The situation in Portland is bad in that the police are extremely short-staffed. Just 2 weeks ago, on the 17th of August, we had a big protest that was the city, and actually the country was kind of bracing for it because it was in the shadows of the 2 recent mass shootings. And that was all hands on deck. All the every Portland police officer was there on duty that day. And at the end, the mayor and the police chief described the event as peaceful and a success, when their baseline is basically that nobody was killed. You looked at some of the video that went viral that day, it was quite crazy at certain points of people getting attacked in the streets, traffic getting shut down, mobs of people using weapons and bear mace almost indiscriminately. And in the end, there were only 13 arrests, now 15. There really probably should have been more than 100. But that was a success for Portland. That's kind of the low bar of Portland.
What have you noticed about discourse, especially online, since the event? Do you feel like the support has been overwhelming the hate, or how are you feeling about how people are communicating with you post that?
I'll focus on the positive first. I'm not the first person to have been seriously injured by Antifa militants. There's been many others, and I'm very fortunate that because of the platform that I had and the following, that my story became big and that people expressed so much support for me. There's many, many other people who've had to suffer in silence and have not had any justice. So I don't take any of this for granted. At the same time, as my profile has risen, a lot of journalists who are sympathetic to Antifa have come against me and put me sort of as their number one target. And in the early, like when I was in the hospital and working on recovery in the immediate hours after the mob beating and robbery, I was saddened to see that that the country couldn't come together in universal condemnation of this brutal act of political violence. Instead, what it was is that they focus on my writings that people perceive to be conservative. They focus that I had been on Fox News, and that has somehow, in their eyes, rationalized that I was either a provocateur or brought this onto myself. And those type of attacks have continued weeks on now, which I guess is fine. I mean, what I'm more worried about are the continuing threats of violence that I have against me, which have been reported to police. So in some ways, this whole experience has been really surreal in that I went from relative obscurity 2.5 months ago to now really having to look over my shoulder when I'm in public, particularly in Portland. Well, thank you.
So now to the other aspect of, first, the political violence resulted in your injury, which, holds you back and causes you physical problems. That's the obvious thing. But what I started seeing after this was, boy, were they mad. They made a big mistake. They beat a guy who didn't do anything, and all of a sudden, there were a lot of questions being asked by the mainstream. Why was he attacked? Well, this reflected very poorly on Antifa and the far-left extremists who had to come up with an excuse. All of a sudden, we started seeing these smears, one of which they did for this event, saying that Andy No provokes the violence so that after he gets hit, he can go on a media tour to gain attention, which is absurd. The only reason Andy gets to go on a media tour is because you attacked him unprovoked. It's people asking, why does this happen? Following this, however, was a video that got released. And boy, did I get a ton of people hitting me up saying, now that Andy No's been exposed, how could you even have him at this event? So I watched the video. Maybe you've heard of it. And I couldn't quite figure out what their criticism was. Apparently, Andy was with some right-wing people, and then a fight happened, and that was grounds for proof that Andy was a provocateur. So then, Andy, you wrote a response to this, so I wanted to make sure we address it. They're claiming that you knew the violence was going to happen. They're claiming that you have a deal with the right-wing groups so that you don't write bad things about them, and then they make sure, they protect you as well. So I know you wrote a piece about it, but I think we should definitely, you should address it.
Yeah, so I was in the UK as this news was breaking. I woke up on Tuesday morning to this barrage of hate mail that was unprecedented. and all these threats, and it was stemming from all these hit pieces saying that essentially that a damning video had come out implicating me as a party to a violent criminal conspiracy in Portland. The accusations are flat out false and defamatory. I'll say that. What the video that was released, selectively released, by the way, from a so-called undercover Antifa activist who uses a pseudonym in a blog post that went on Portland Mercury, he said that I was there when a group of right-wingers were planning violence and then a fight happened outside a bar. I was there that day. It was me and several other journalists. This group of people were milling around. This was on the 1st of May. For about an hour. It was really uneventful. I was walking near them, away from them. I was preoccupied with other things. I was looking on Twitter, for one, to see how other journalists had covered the demonstrations early in the day, because I had been earlier punched and sprayed with silly spring by some mass Antifa activists. So I didn't hear what they were talking about. And what I did, the glimpses of the conversations that I heard, it wasn't full enough for me to make an evaluation that this was people planning violence, which I think may not be so clear if you watch the video. I recommend it. It's 18 minutes long. So most people had not even seen the video. They just read how other people had summarized it and used that to smear me. I think it shows their desperation, because even they recognize that a mob of mass militants attacking a journalist is egregious. And so, I mean, since the 29th of June, every tactic has been about how do we delegitimize him or frame him as far right or extreme, or somehow in collusion with extremists, that he brought this onto himself. It's a big learning experience for me. Most people will not experience themselves being unpersoned in real time. And it's also, like, I have always been very critical of those who would use the term fake news. I find it very inflammatory and could incite hatred toward those in the media. But like watching how a false headline or a false hook, just like one person repeats it and how it gets repeated over and over within like the same network of left-wing journalists, and it gets amplified within literally minutes or hours, and then this sets the narrative. Fortunately, I was able to counter with my side of the story that came out in Spectator yesterday. There's a lot of people who get smeared like this, and they have no place to go to.
But I guess, go ahead.
Do you feel like there is any future of peacefully communicating with Antifa? I mean, I know that there have been protesters for this event somehow. We invited them. They're not here. They don't want to talk.
They're pro-violence.
So do you see? They are? Oh, great. Do they want to talk? Oh, great. All right. We have some time. Maybe in the next panel we can get to that. But Andy, do you have any friends in Antifa? Do you have any sort of inside tracks to trying to resolve this?
You know, for people who are not living in Portland and their experience with Antifa is through these viral videos that show this outrageous scenes of street hooliganism, it can be easy to sort of dismiss the whole thing as comical and funny. But like living and working in Portland and seeing the normalization of political violence on our streets there, it's really no laughing matter. The number of people who are engaging in the actual street violence as part of Black Bloc is very small, but they draw morale and protection from the larger number of people who are not really aware of Antifa's extreme ideology. It's made up of anarchists and communists, and they're really thinking that they're part of a vanguard for a revolution. There's a lot of people who come out genuinely thinking that they're opposing the far right or alt-right, and they're not aware of all that. I've always, in the time that I've covered these demonstrations, I don't cover my face, I don't wear a helmet, I don't disguise myself anyways, because I want people to feel like I have nothing to hide. I'm just a human like you. Unfortunately, I think in the mob settings, these people don't think as individuals. They're part of a group, and that's part of what adopting that uniform is. When they're wearing that, you're no longer an individual. You are one part of this crowd, right?
So you know what I think is fuel for this, and speaking to the effects of political violence, is we do have instances where there are fringe, far-right, whatever you want to call them, crazy people, show up, drop a manifesto, and they do these horrifying things. We then see a media that reacts because, look, let's be real. These events are shocking and terrifying, and we want them to stop. All of a sudden, this is weaponized, and this is what really worries me. Yeah, we know, everybody knows what happened in Christchurch, and it's one of the most horrifying dystopian things many of us have ever seen, the live stream massacre of innocent worshipers. So there's real reason to be terrified of that, and there's a real reason why we need, law enforcement and authorities and whatever we can do, de-radicalization. But then you have these people on the far left who will then point the finger at even an event like this, which has like a milquetoast fence sitter. A very rather tepid individual who's actually, just trying to bring people together, and they'll accuse it of being in league with those same people, which then results in political violence targeting regular people, or in this instance, a journalist who before this you don't identify as conservative. You're just, I think you've said on the Rogan podcast you were center-right.
Yeah, so I think after what happened to me, everybody wanted to know, Andy, are you a right-wing journalist? Are you conservative? And I've always tried to avoid labeling myself because I thought that could be a barrier in my news coverage and how I work. But I think with me expressing my opinion in so many interviews now, it should be honest, and that's why I answered Joe Rogan's question. I said I was center-right. Not because I really hold on to a lot of traditional conservative values, but the things that are really important to me are gratitude and recognition of the importance of tradition. And like my parents were given refuge in the West and they escaped the communist revolution. So just, I don't have the luxury of viewing socialism, Marxism, or communism with the same type of rose-colored glasses that a lot of my peers do in Portland. And for that, people then just accuse me of being conservative or right-wing, and now I come to accept that if that's how people want to label me, I'm okay with that.
One thing that's really kind of been, well, I brought this up in the last panel that, people accuse me of like changing or whatever. There's an interview with me from, I believe, Gothamist, where I was asked about the Black Bloc violence, and I denounced it in no uncertain terms. But the thing is, during Occupy Wall Street, I was physically attacked 3 times, and they apparently liked me. I was there on the ground, and there were some people who didn't like me, but they didn't beat me up. But there were a few people, Black Bloc, far leftist types, typically, colloquially now called Antifa, not always, and at the time, I got a phone call from one of the organizers of Occupy Wall Street saying, we want to provide security for you from one of our activists. And I said, that's okay, I appreciate it, but no. So we've come from this point where in 2011, even the activists were like, this violence is bad, we can't allow this, especially if they're attacking someone like Tim, even if he's independent, even if he doesn't want to support us. They actually threatened me. They said, if you don't report favorably of us, we will stop you. I was brought outside of the Deutsche Bank Center, the publicly owned private space, it's called the Pops, and someone told me that. They said, stop filming us breaking the law, otherwise we will stop you. And I said, no. And I was offered protection by the activists because that was, egregious. Since then, we have seen like an escalation in the violence. And admittedly, look, I always want to make sure it's clear because this is one of the first things the left will say, but what about the far right? They're really bad. Well, of course they're bad. They're both bad. I think everybody recognizes that. But I'll tell you the effect on me. I haven't gone out on the ground in a very long time, and there's a few reasons for that. Look, I don't care if somebody wants to come and take a swing at me. We saw what happened with Andy, and I felt like that was entirely predictable. It was only a matter of time before they just start going crazy, and I'll tell you what, it's only a matter of time before it gets even worse than this. But when I went to Berkeley a couple years ago, there was a far left forum where they posted a picture of my mom. And that, I think, for most people, sends a real message. So when we try to put on events like this and the threat of political violence is escalating, I'll tell you what the effects are. I'll say this about myself. I haven't gone down to one of these street conflicts in a long time. It's not smart. As, you know, and especially we know what's happening with Andy, but I am going to be doing on-the-ground reporting coming soon. So you guys know the impact on me. I mean, I guess you can only imagine what it would be like if someone sent you a picture of your family because you were trying to go and film things. But Andy, will you continue to go out on the ground and film and do everything as you did, or is this going to change the way you cover stories?
In the immediate after what happened to me, I remember I was laying in the hospital bed and feeling really like I wasn't going to let these thugs silence me or change how I do my work. But I realized, once I got, let me get to the however. However, I had a CT scan and it confirmed that as a result of that beating, I had a brain bleed from it. And it's just like I'm having ongoing therapies related to that. And it's like, I can't risk my health in this way. It's too dangerous. And it makes me sad to say that I can no longer really work the same way as I used to before. And, I've thought about different tactics, for example, coming with professional paid security to come and be around me. But, that would, in an environment like Portland, when there are people coming ready to brawl with weapons like bats or crowbars or brass knuckles, like, not only would I be putting myself at risk, I would be putting anybody who protects me at risk, and that would be reckless. So, unfortunately, I have to change how I work, but the positive news is, as you know, there's many ways to cover a protest without putting yourself right at the center. So I'm learning new ways to become creative, and keep following my work, and you'll see how I evolve in what I do.
I think we need to figure out how to change the tactics at these big public protests, because, just look at how far we've come from, the nonviolent protests of the civil rights era, which worked, to now. It's like, why aren't we looking at what worked?
There is a meme going around. It's amazing. And it's a tweet from, I guess you can call it a meme. It's a tweet from this woman who says, "We can't have a dialogue. You will not change their minds. It's time to go punch a Nazi." And then below it is a screen grab of the story about Daryl Davis, who literally changed the minds of Klan members. So that's why I get so, it's so frustrating, because the first and obvious thing is that when you normalize violence, it gets normalized back. And this is something that everybody talks about online. You get people to go out. You know what was really scary to me? I'm not a fan of Richard Spencer. He's not a very well-liked guy in this country. There's one opinion, but look, people think he's got deplorable opinions. Does it mean you should punch him in the face? I know it might feel good, but that small emotional satisfaction opens the door for them to rally, and then what happens? We see the escalation in Charlottesville. So look, there are bad people. You get them angry, they rally together, and they respond in kind. It's escalation. It reminds me of Batman. I think it was like the first Batman Begins or whatever, and Batman puts on the armor, and then Gordon says, "But what about escalation? We put on armor, they get armor-piercing bullets, then so on and so forth." The truly scary thing to me about the escalation, and actually I can give you some potentially breaking news right now, partially confirmed. I have seen some evidence to suggest, and have some reporting, that activists in Hong Kong have started using live ammunition against the police. So maybe I shouldn't have reported that yet, so take it with a grain of salt, but Subverse is doing some serious work, okay? But let me stress, we have reporters on the ground in Hong Kong, and it may get them in trouble, so I'm trying to be careful, but I've seen the footage. I've seen a frame of a discharged weapon pointed towards the police, and it's been told to me by a reporter that's the case. And I probably shouldn't have said anything about it yet, because it's very dangerous what's going on there. But when someone comes out with a weapon like that, what do you think the police will come out with next? In fact, I'll walk that back. The police pulled their guns first. So what truly scares me about what we saw with Andy is how many people now on the other side say we have no choice but to bring weapons next time. And then Antifa says, okay, now we have no choice but to bring our weapons. And we know there are left-wing and right-wing militias. And how long until that escalation gets truly, truly bloody? And that is what scares me about the violence.
Here's a free piece of advice for Antifa. Have a protest and all be just sitting peacefully meditating. I mean, it will completely shift people's ability to attack you, and it will facilitate conversation. I mean, the thing is that it's not going away. So we have to talk about it, and that's why it's just disturbing to me. I'm honestly embarrassed for some of the protesters of this. Like, I don't think that they're really just aware of what we're doing here. Maybe there's a miscommunication on our end, slightly. I think we made it very clear, the intentions, but I just hope that they can learn.
There are people who believe weird things, and you know what? I don't know why. But one of the arguments put forward by the protesters of this event is that a bunch of racists were holding an event called Ending Racism to secretly preach racism to an audience that was expecting an Ending Racism event. I don't understand that logic. It's like I can stand up here and say, hey, everybody, thanks for coming. Racism is really, really bad. I don't like it, and I'm going to tell you why. And what did they think was going to like, I don't know. It's a conspiracy. It's like they think white supremacists have secret meetings where they giggle about how racism is bad. And then people paid it like... Or it's disingenuous. And, you know, I think there are good people who are being misled into violent situations. And I've had experience, you know, I've worked for nonprofits where there are people who are willing to get violent. And I will admit, you know, throughout history, there have been instances where violence has, you know, look, there's revolution, there are things, there's war, there's self-defense. I get it. I'm not an absolutist, right? Self-defense is violence. It can be. It's a complicated conversation. But there are activist organizations that will rally a group of people and say, we're going to do something peaceful. And then they have a group that they will specifically select to be the front to protect them from police while they do something violent. And these people don't know it. You know, so there are tactics to, for instance, call a local organization and say, hey, they're secretly racist. And then you can walk away and they come and they protest and they incite because they think they're doing the right thing. So misinformation plays a huge role in this.
Andy, I'm curious where you see the media, alternative and mainstream, going over the next couple of years. Do you think that we're going to continue polarizing, or do you think that the more honest media is going to keep rising up?
I'm not sure if I'm qualified enough to really give an informed opinion on this, but if I may bring up a different point. I've been asked in some interviews, like, do you think Antifa will succeed in their goals? And I'm surprised I get asked that because it's so obvious that they won't. You know, we have such a developed... We're living in an embedded liberal democracy. Like, no small violent fringe movement like that is going to achieve the goals of revolution. Well, however, what I am concerned about, because what I do see, that doesn't mean that they can't win in other ways. And I think in other ways that they are winning, for one, is at parts of their ideology and tactics are mainstream and normalized now. I mean, like, some political violence is not even controversial anymore. It started with the punch your Nazi meme, and then, of course, Nazi is applied so liberally to so many people. And then more recently in the UK was the milkshaking, which quickly spread to the US. And then what happened to me, like, milkshaking, some people think of it as a cute form of political dissent, but, you know, when you're in a mob setting, you have one thrown at your face, you can't see because it blinds you. And then on top of that, it marks you as a target for everybody else. That's the insidious nature of milkshaking, and I'm concerned that there's so many people voices in mainstream media and pundits who don't see issues with celebrating these acts of assault.
I want to make an important point. Antifa means anti-fascist. I'm pretty sure everyone here opposes fascism. At least I hope so, because that's kind of what we're opposing, right? Authoritarianism is bad. The right to freely express yourself and live and let live and not infringe on others' rights and slowly progress towards improving society are things I think are wonderful, and violence is wrong. And forcing people to live under a boot heel is terrifying. And they use this name and say anybody who opposes Antifa is pro-fascist. And I know with Andy saying that they're not going to achieve their goals, they're going to immediately turn around and say, oh, of ending fascism? Well, no, let's clarify. The Antifa people rally around this name so they can claim they oppose fascism. Fascism is horrifying and really bad. One of the worst forms of government, if not the worst. But at its core is authoritarianism. So we can draw that distinction. Their goals are authoritarianism, forcing you to bend the knee under the threat of violence or else. They've harassed businesses, they've forced us to change venues. These are not free, loving people who want to respect open dialogue with a group. What we had more female speakers than male, we had speakers of color. We have people we are trying to bring together. So I will say this. This event is called Ending Racism. Anyone protesting it is pro-racist. I am kidding, though, by the way. We understand nuance.
So Vice put out a piece, I think maybe a month ago, How to Milkshake, a guide. So I'm curious from Tim, like, just what your thoughts are on the state of Vice.
You know, I recently sold some photos to them, like literally a month ago or something. Yeah, they mailed me a check. I got to pick it up.
That's the thing. It's like it's not simple. They're a huge organization. It's not, you know.
Oh, I was excited though. I was really excited because I had photos from the White House summit. They hit me up and said we want to use them, and I was like, oh, you betcha. I'm gonna really enjoy holding up the Vice check because they're like, Tim used to work for Vice. I recently did too. Vice, look, when I wanted to join Vice, you know, it was after Occupy Wall Street because I'm looking at all these news agencies and they were just so, I don't know, stocky and boring. And Vice was cool. You know, they were doing cool, crazy stuff. But it was an exploration, these documentaries they were doing. I can't tell you why, but something happened around, I guess it was the Gamergate era. Sorry for bringing that up again, but I had no idea what Gamergate was. I didn't care. I was like on the ground in Thailand or something. And Vice let me do whatever I wanted. It was complicated. It was a hard place to work. But something happened to Vice around the same time as I moved to Fusion, where Fusion was ABC Univision joint venture. When I joined them, they said, we're nonpartisan. They had posters on the wall. And then something happened where around the same time, both companies started embracing wokeness and cancel culture. And I was talking to some people recently about the changes that we're seeing culturally, embracing, defending milkshaking, defending Antifa and violence. It was weird to me. And so I was talking to someone, and they were asking me why I changed. And I said, have you read a Vice article lately? For instance, and I'm not defending this, by the way, but I'm going to tell you. There was one that said, this horrifying app can show you any woman naked. And I said to the Vice guy, what do you think the title of that article would have been, I don't know, 6 years ago? And he was like, oh, something like this amazing app would show you any woman naked. And I'm like, hey, so something happened in the media where they all collectively decided to start changing their ideology. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but then when you get to the point, like, you know, if you want to criticize an app, I don't care. But when you get to the point where you actually have someone being beaten in the street and their immediate response is, what was he wearing? You know, what was he saying? I'm like, something's going on here that's kind of worrying me. Well, exactly, that's literally the point. They blame Andy. Oh, well, he should have known better. I saw somebody from the New York Times say Andy should have known better. That the New York Times, the gray lady saying journalists should know better because people will beat them up. Yeah, that's the precedent we're facing. That's really scary. So I don't know. We brought up Vice, and there you go. I ranted.
So what's up now, Andy? What are you working on?
Well, I have some exciting projects coming out soon, but I have to keep it under wraps, so just sorry that I can't say more. Just keep following my work, and you'll find out in due course. You do you, we love you. Thank you.
All right.
I'll add in just like talking about media. Look, I think both Andy and I, in terms of the content we've created, have probably made mistakes, could probably be criticized for a lot. And that's okay. I welcome and I accept it because we just talked about how to admit when you were wrong. So I absolutely welcome critique and criticism. And, I always say, like, one of the favorite channels I throw out to counter my views is someone like David Pakman, as much as I think Sargon wanted to say he was insufferable. I think he's okay. I don't agree with him on everything, but I do think it's important to have that balance. Instead of beating someone up on the ground because you don't like them, try expanding your view and looking at other media and, I don't know, maybe don't listen to him. But I guess when we're talking about a political battle of ideas, when they can't win that idea, they resort to punching you in the head. Well, that's wrong. And we want to end that, so there you go.
Yeah, I think David Pakman he was going to participate in the event. I'm going to kind of address this. So he said he was going to. Well, he's on Minds. I'm cool with David. I think that he's generally like pretty balanced, like on point with his principles. And he was like, oh yeah, I'll do a video that we would play here. And then on Twitter, he's like, oh no, I'm not. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not going to that event. And so it's just like a little bit of game playing, and it's okay, whatever. He has his audience, and I hope that. Put it this way: he's not the problem. He's at least sort of acting as a bridge between the left and the right to a degree.
I think I think David's great. He's not calling for violence. He's pushed back on craziness, and he's a progressive. That a progressive should be. Not like these other organizations that laugh when someone gets beaten up. I disagree with the guy, but that's fantastic. We should disagree. It's how we improve our ideas and move forward. But when you have these, I'm not going to call on any certain websites, but they're like all of these journalists were tweeting and laughing about political violence. Like, no, that's the left that we're concerned about, as we find, worrisome. We all know when the right goes too far. I think, who said, who was it? Was it Jordan Peterson who said this? We all know when they go too far. And it seems like there are conservatives in this country who have absolutely no problem pointing the finger and say, get out. Like that Steve King guy in Congress, he gets cut off from he's fundraised no money. I read something, he's got like 20 grand, I could be wrong. But the Republicans had no problem saying, get out. The left doesn't seem to know when the left is going too far, or the media or the mainstream for whatever reason. And because of this, whether you like them or not, Breitbart compiled a list of over the past 2 years of like 700 instances of violence and harassment against conservatives. Okay, that's unacceptable. You don't have to like the people, but we all can agree. You don't smack them. You don't throw drinks in their face. You don't beat them. Or you don't beat a journalist in the street because you don't like their ideas. How we overcome that, I think, starts with the media, which is probably why most of you are here, because we're sitting in an echo chamber and we agree with each other for the most part, but that's the big problem. The protesters are outside when they were invited to participate.
Well, maybe we'll get something out of one of them over there. So, Andy, between when you got assaulted versus the next protest at Portland, do you feel like there was positive momentum towards? Was there less violence, obviously, at the more recent one, and do you feel like that is moving in a productive direction?
There was less violence, but here's the thing in Portland: the issues with policing are systemic, and I suspect it's because of who's in charge. And so when there's a lot of attention and eyes on Portland, they'll do all hands on deck. They'll make sure that no police officer gets a day off. But as soon as when the national media starts forgetting and moving on, focusing on different things, it's just the same thing again. It's, what's happening in Portland is kind of like it's a nightmare version of Groundhog Day. It's the same, we're experiencing the same story over and over, and sometimes little thing changes, but most of it stays the same. So I'm concerned. I'm not entirely optimistic that moving forward the police will enforce the law, because there's actually no political will to really crack down on the far-left militants. Just going off what you said, I think one common refrain I hear from a lot of my detractors is, well, Antifa hasn't killed anybody, and look how many people the far right has killed. I think that's indisputable, but what they're overlooking is how much damage can be done short of actually killing somebody. I mean, my injuries, another man that day had very serious lacerations on his head when he was beat with a crowbar. Many other people, like, you can be extremely destabilizing to society without killing a single person. So, like, the metric of body counts is helpful in assessing how deadly a movement is, but it's not the only metric. There are many other things.
So I was in Berkeley not too long ago, and I noticed a really weird thing. All of these businesses had flyers in their windows for far-left ideology. I went to a bar, and they had a sign in their window that was very disparaging to the president. And I don't care. Like, I actually enjoy when people make fun of the president in many occasions. So I'm looking for a good joke. I can take a joke. And I'm talking to the bartender, and I asked him about it, and they kind of shrugged it off. I asked him, doesn't seem like you're too interested in making, why would you have this? And they said, if we don't put it in the window, they'll break it. There's a photo from the G20 in Hamburg, Germany, with a whole row of storefronts smashed out, save one. It's got the far left resistance fist plastered in the window. So you don't need to kill anybody. You can just threaten to destroy their life, and they will bend the knee. And that breaks my heart. Break my window. I don't care. Come to my house. Show up at 4 a.m. You're not going to change. You're not going to change my opinion. But I will personally. I will be damned if I'm going to live in a world where I have to put your flyer in my window over fear of you destroying my life. I don't care. It's never going to happen. So they can try to shut us down, and unfortunately for too many people it works. But we need to grow resilient to the threats. If everyone in those storefronts stood in front of the building with their arms crossed and said, "Don't you dare touch my window," they wouldn't do it. But I understand. It's scary. What did Captain America say? The price for freedom is high, but I'm willing to pay it.
What a great way to move into Q&A than with a Captain America quote. Let's start with a quick question from Minds. This is Thistle Force, whoever you are, and this is for Bill. Bill, if we get an Internet Bill of Rights and force Google and Facebook to behave, does that make Minds irrelevant?
I've said for a long time, actually, if any of the major social networks, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, whichever one, open sources all their code, starts respecting people's privacy, decentralizes, and adopts free speech policies, they're going to grow and win. So, yeah, but they're not going to. So, and it's also not like one ring to rule them all. Like, there are many networks. There's going to be room for many networks. So, they all should.
Thank you. And that question came from mine, so you're clearly doing something right.
Like equals. Okay, gotcha. Hey there. Has anybody gotten in front of a microphone and forgot exactly how they worded their question a few seconds ago?
I have. Thank you for your question.
Yeah,
Next.
Yeah. Sorry. I might stumble through this. So, kind of touching back on the previous section a little bit, people admitting when they're wrong and ending political violence. Do you think it would make a significant difference if major news organizations made the effort for their misinformation, be it accidental or not, they got the right information out with the same effort and the same intensity, they put out the wrong information? And if so, how do we encourage these organizations to do so?
Yeah, you're right. I don't know. There's too much at stake. I mean, who was it? I hate to name the wrong person. Was it Jake Tapper who compared Antifa to the soldiers storming Normandy?
No,
it's
Chris Cuomo.
Chris Cuomo? Okay. This is the exact opposite of what needs to happen. And I have no idea, it was a tribal mentality. It was, I guess Cuomo, you said, who just was like, hey, this is a fun game everyone's playing. He clearly didn't know what he was talking about, and he uses a massive platform to encourage violence. So how you encourage them? I guess constantly doing events, encouraging conversations, make things they can't ignore. And, I think Cuomo did at some point out the violence, but certainly not enough, because I think they're terrified of admitting they're wrong because they're news agencies. Nobody wants to put a retraction on that page. Nobody wants to put that correction. They try and sweep it under the rug. That's a big challenge, but if we could, and if they did address that and say, you know what, we were wrong about this, that might save everybody. That might de-escalate everything. So maybe, I don't know. I hope we can figure it out.
Thanks, Andy. I hope you have a speedy recovery.
Thank you.
When Donald Trump won in 2016, it sort of drove the Democrats insane. I would have thought they would have taken some time to self-reflect, perhaps, and dial back their policies, move to a more center position, but they went even farther left. Do you think, now it seems like he's going to win again in 2020, at least right now it seems like that. So if that were to happen, do you think that they're going to actually reflect or just double down even harder?
Have you guys ever heard of the Spanish Inquisition? But yeah, to answer your question, I think it's going to get way worse. Right? To be serious, I think I was down there on his first inauguration.
The first time I came face to face with Antifa Black Bloc was in November 2016. So in Portland, we had 3 days of protesting in the streets that devolved into riots. There was $1 million of damage done when people taking bats were destroying businesses' property and starting fires in the street. And ever since then, the win of Trump and his various policies that are seen as controversial continue to be a big propaganda and recruitment tool for Antifa as a movement. And I just worry what will happen in 2020 if he was to win again. I think, people will use that to radicalize people who broadly share some opposition to the Trump administration, but don't really know how violent and extreme Antifa is, and they're quite good at their narrative, and they really depend on their fellow travelers in the media to cover for them, to whitewash their activities. So, I try in my work to continue to call that out.
And I definitely want to make sure we don't fall into the trap of only talking about the left. There certainly are fringe elements of the right that feel emboldened by Trump. But again, I feel like our society knows when they've gone too far, and we have the surveillance apparatus to go after these extremist groups. So it is important, as much as we can talk about the fringest of the craziest right-wingers and how much more dangerous and lethal they are, like Andy said, undeniable, I think one of the big things we're trying to do is say, hey, look, we know they're bad, but can't we at least condemn lower-level violence too, and talk about property destruction and other forms of violence that are going to be escalated when Trump wins?
Quick question for Bill, or do you want to respond?
I just want to make sure to get this Antifa guy having a question. We need it. Oh, you said you did. You raised your hand.
Wait. You calling me an Antifa guy?
Yeah, he's calling you Antifa.
Oh, that guy. Oh, you raised your hand when he did. All right, never mind.
Antifa literally just lied about me on the internet.
Okay, all right.
I don't know
Was that the reporter
Never
who said
mind.
you slurred?
With that being said, quick question from Minds before we keep going. This is for Bill, the internet mogul. Bill, and this is from Ninja Unicorn, creative name, love it. Given the common media narrative, what are your thoughts on the idea that alternative media websites, such as Minds, are leading to political violence?
Yeah, so dozens of studies confirm that censorship causes violence. So you need to provide a social vent for conversations to happen. That's how pressure builds. If you restrict that, that's how pressure builds, and that's how violence occurs. So, echo chambers can form, and that can be damaging, but when you allow First Amendment-based speech to occur, that's as good as you can do to prevent echo chambers.
Let me compliment you a little bit, Bill. They have a jury system, which means it's not so much about what you as a company thinks. It's about if something pops up, the users collectively decide. So taking it out of the hands of the authority, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The mandate of the juries in the appeal process is to enforce the First Amendment-based policy, but because you want to eliminate bias and make it so that mobs can't take over the jury, which is really important. But
these big tech companies engaging in censorship are taking somebody who got busted with a little bag of weed and they're putting them in a prison with murderers. You ban somebody for saying a naughty word, and they can only go to the darkest, deepest corners of the internet where they're now surrounded by the worst of the worst. It seems so simple, and we have the data that shows it, but there's this obsession with turning Twitter into a platform for 10 activists instead of the entire world, and I don't know why.
They think you're Dan Crenshaw, and that's why they're clapping.
I know. I'm a lot more American than Dan Crenshaw. Come on. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man still looks like a gay pirate. I'm not here to ask a question, and so you should probably kick me off right now, but I just wanted to point out there is a pigeon-shaped lady who is interviewing people and lying about them on Twitter. The one with one eyebrow? That one? Be careful, folks. She is chilling with her curly-haired boyfriend, and she is a liar.
Thank you, poor man's Dan Crenshaw.
Well, I will, I would say that at least I assumed there were going to be people here who were going to try and come in and say they're press, and they were going to lie and misconstrue and smear. But you know what? We would be hypocrites if we didn't allow them to come in and have a conversation, even if they're coming in bad faith. Free speech, free expression, free press. Here's the challenge, man. I have a lot of friends in the hacker community, and growing up, I would see the power of what I would call cheating. And my friends would tell me, if you're not cheating, you're not trying, because cheating is just the way to win, right? And so I think about this. I have principles. I believe in the right to the press, and I also believe in a right to free speech. I believe defamation and slander aren't protected, but I can't presume that before they even have a chance. So they're welcome to come in, but then they cheat. And that scares me because I'm not willing to. And if they are, they have a massive advantage. I don't know what to say about it, but you just got to be on your guard, I guess.
Go for it.
So there have been numerous historical examples of political violence inevitably resulting in more authoritarian regimes, from ancient Rome, revolutionary France, fascist Germany, and Italy. How does a group that claims to fight fascism not realize and rectify this hypocrisy? And how do you think the normalization of these groups, how do you think that, what does that tell us about the future of the United States?
So I'll try to explain Antifa's position and the hardcore ideologues. They really think that we are living in a time of ascendant fascism, and that their group Antifa, they take the name and mythos from the interwar years in Europe, and they believe they're part of that legacy of being the people who oppose the fascists. So that's why they're willing to do, that's why they have terms like by any means necessary, because they do believe that some of these ideas on the right are so dangerous that if we allow them to be expressed openly, that's how they used to recruit, and it's going to lead to another Holocaust. Sorry, I forget what your question was. Sorry, one of the.
It was a really good
well,
answer,
so-
though. We can all clap now.
Well, all right, hold on. I'm going to ask a really nerdy question first. How many people played Magic the Gathering? Hey. Here's an easier question. How many people play chess? Right. So the thing is, when you're playing chess, you have to think about what comes next. If I move my pawn, how will they respond? What are all the variables? You think ahead, you plan. I feel like many of these people in Antifa may have good intentions. Many of them may be really angry, and they need, to calm that hate and that anger. But they may really genuinely believe, hey, look, this guy, and let's be real, I want to be honest, I have seen Antifa protest actual white supremacist rallies. I want to make sure we're specifically talking about when they come after regular, conventional conservatives or people having an anti-racism event. They falsely attribute this. And so I ask, what do you think comes next when you start terrorizing small businesses that don't know what's happening? Do you think you will end fascism by wreaking havoc throughout the town? What comes next? The people of that town, confused and scared, reach up to they look in the sky and beg to the strong man, save us. And he says, I will, by placing police on every street corner. And that'll work in the short term. And then you actually bring about the fascism because the masses don't understand what you're doing or why. They're scared of you. You're wearing black masks, you're carrying crowbars, and you're beating journalists in the street. So they reach for that strong man and say, I'm scared. I don't know what's happening. Will you protect me? And that is what, when I think to the future, I see these roving bands of, what I would call low-tier violence, right? They're not coming out, well, at least they're starting to now with guns. But that's when you get regular people who want to go to the casino, who want to live in a small town, getting truly terrified. Why is this happening? We don't know why. Just send out the police. You want to get a police state? You want fascism? Terrify the public into begging for it. They're not doing what they think they're doing. They're doing the opposite.
Go right up into the mic.
All right. Now, we see a lot of talk about normalization these days, and especially the normalization of political violence, but we also see a lot of talk about keeping things that we find undesirable out of our fiction because it normalizes them. I see exploring these concepts in fiction as a very important way of finding out how to deal with them. And in particular, I think we've seen a lot of lionization of people who fight fascism because they're very easy bad guys, like in Tarantino films and whatnot, where you see them killing the racist. But we don't see the reverse for left-wing extremism. Do you think that fiction is playing a significant role in creating, LARPers who become violent protesters?
There was a movie called The Hunt, and I did a segment where I was really concerned and, about a movie that was normalizing violence between factions. And I actually think I was wrong. When I said maybe it shouldn't be released, I questioned myself in the video because I'm very, free speechy. But the movie ended up getting canceled. And then I started talking to people about it, and I was like, yeah, maybe I was wrong, because that was kind of an inversion of the fiction you bring up. In that movie, it was, for one, it was meant to be silly, over-the-top parody, but it was the elite liberals who were the bad guys. And so a lot of people on the right had the immediate assumption that it was going to just glorify the murder of conservatives, when in fact, it was actually much more silly than that. And in fact, the conservatives were good guys. So maybe we do need some silly fiction that might be violent sometimes, and we need it to affect, all sides. That way we can, poke fun at each other and be like, maybe we're getting a little crazy here.
Yeah, I mean, Daryl will say when we're talking, we're not fighting. So memes, dark memes, whatever it is, like that is not fighting. So it's
Meme
ventilation.
war.
We need it.
Last question.
First of all, there's been an incident in Odessa, Texas. Ford Fisher just tweeted it. You need to look that up. My question is this. When I blog and so forth, I get a lot of feedback from people who would like me to stop because I'm competing with them, and they want me to join and raise money for them and help them. And they say that I'm hollowing out the middle. And a lot of the censorship is really about the fact that the old-fashioned, liberal Democratic parties in the midstream is being hollowed out because people like me won't help candidates or won't help them. So it leaves it to the extreme. So they think that independent journalism competes with actual activism, that people should be taking action rather than just talking. I get this a lot in emails sent to me and tweets sent to me. I see a lot of this in my own practice. I just wonder if you've gotten that impression too.
Sorry, I was looking up Ford Fisher's tweets.
Yeah,
What are you talking about, Vermin Supreme?
20 people are injured in Odessa.
Oh, whoa, I didn't see that.
Yeah, that just happened.
Oh, really?
Sorry,
Breaking news. Well, you guys were listening, right?
What he was asking, does competition negatively affect creators or bloggers or content creators?
Because that's the feedback I get myself in emails sent to me.
Do you mean like competition among other creators and each other?
No, not other, well, sometimes, but more active. Why aren't you taking action and joining us so that we can actually get something done? Why are you just criticizing us? We can't get anything done when a lot of you won't help us. And,
I mean,
call senators when we tell you to and won't march when we tell you to. I get that complaint all the time that by dropping out, I'm hurting them.
It's you know, here's the thing. You know, I talked about this with some people when they started doing this harassment campaign against the venues. I said, you know, I could easily put out one tweet and dwarf what they were, you know, tweeting, and we'd get way more positive phone calls. And we just agreed not to do it because, I mean, what do we do? I feel like where at least I am, I get it, you know, calling politicians and all that stuff. Personally, I have very tepid opinions on most policies. But when it comes to the activists, do I really want to just make things worse and engage in the same behavior? And you know what? Maybe it's a critical weakness we have that we're really capable of pointing to the problem and not coming up with a solution. And maybe that's why. Thanks, yeah.
Thank
I
you.
apologize. I don't know.
All right, everyone. Keep it going for everyone here.
Oh my God.
5 minutes for relieving yourselves, refilling yourselves, and then we're back here for our capstone presentation. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be epic.